We will get in. Okay. Everyone needs to accept that. So this evening, our presenter is Sam Wolf, who is a shorebird biologist with Manomet, which is a nonprofit organization focusing on shorebird research and conservation throughout the Western Hemisphere. Sam has a master's degree in range and wildlife management from Texas A&M, Kingsville, and lives in Rockport, Texas, where I dare say it's probably a little warmer and probably less snowy, I would hope. This evening, we're going to be learning about the staging, the amazing staging of Whimbrel on the Texas coast. So Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you right now. You can unmute and it's all yours. You should be able to share screen.
Yeah, I'll mute everyone else.
Thank you.
Okay, how's that? Can you guys hear me okay and see my screen?
Screen is great. You could be a little louder.
All right, I'll try to speak up. How's that?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks for being here, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about my Whimbrel work here in Texas. But first, I just want to make sure everyone mutes their microphone, and then just wanted to let you know that I will save time at the end for questions. So you can definitely put your questions in the chat at any time, and then I can go through them after the presentation.
Can you get a little louder?
Yeah, I think so. I agree.
Can everyone hear me okay?
No. No.
Okay.
Maybe closer to the mic or something?
I hear her fine.
You know, we hear you. It's just not that loud.
Okay. Is your volume up, I assume? I'm pretty close to the mic, so.
That's better when you're closer.
Okay. All right. Well, just feel free to interrupt me if you can't hear me at any point. So I just wanted to give some background on myself. I met Sandy actually in Panama, so that's kind of how I got hooked up with giving this presentation to your group. So that was my first time birding in another country, so it was super exciting for me, and yeah, we had a great time. So I was happy to do this presentation and just kind of explain the work that I do in Texas. So I'm originally from Illinois, actually, but fieldwork has taken me all over the place. Illinois is a little bit boring for birds and for wildlife. So I've moved all around, but my biggest interest throughout all of my jobs has always been bird migration. And to this day, I still haven't found anything that gets me quite as excited as seeing congregation of birds after they've migrated and crossed the Gulf of Mexico. And they're just feeding feverishly. It could be songbirds or shorebirds or even raptors. So those long distance migrations are just such a spectacle in a lot of ways, and there's a lot that we still don't know about migration, so it makes it really fascinating to me. I wanted to introduce my organization for anyone who hasn't heard of us. We are a nonprofit based out of Massachusetts, and we focus on shorebird research and conservation. We have staff located across the entire Western Hemisphere, and here in North America, I represent Texas, and we've also got staff in Georgia and Maine, and of course, Massachusetts, and we've got staff in Latin America as well. And the reason we have staff all over the place is because shorebirds travel across continents, so it's important that we're working at a flyway scale. So I use the term shorebird, and I just want to make sure everyone here understands what a shorebird is, because the name is a little bit of a misnomer. Shorebirds don't just live on the shore. They live in a variety of habitats. So these birds are grouped based on genetic relationships. So sandpipers and plovers, phalaropes, and curlews are all closely related, and collectively we call them shorebirds. A lot of these birds are long distance migrants. Some species travel thousands of miles every year. And in Texas, at least, you can see somewhere on the order of 30 species of shorebirds. So Whimbrel are related to long-billed curlews. They are large-bodied shorebird with a curved bill. Their bill is typically shorter than a curlew, and they lack that cinnamon color. They have racing stripes on their head and through their eyes, and in flight they have a sort of distinct football shape to them and very strong wings. These are some great Whimbrel photos taken by your very own Sandy. I really like this photo of the flock of Whimbrels flying. It might be more typical for you guys on the East Coast to see a big flock of Whimbrel, I'm not sure, but here in Texas, most people usually only see one or two at a time. And so if you do see a big group, it's really exciting. And this is a look at where Whimbrels occur throughout the world. The blue is their winter range, and the orange is breeding, which typically occurs in the Arctic. Whimbrels actually migrate really far distances to get between these two places, and some Whimbrels in our neck of the woods travel 20,000 miles in a year, and they will cross large deserts and large oceans to get to and from these places. Now, the reason we focus on Whimbrel research is that along with many other shorebird species, they're suffering global population declines. And this recent paper talks about that, specifically in North America. But Whimbrel are especially vulnerable because of their adaptation to specific food resources. They're somewhat flexible in their diet, but with that really long curved bill, there's only so much they can do to adapt. They also depend on coastal habitats during certain parts of their life cycle. And because humans also like the coast, habitat is going away due to things like human disturbance and development. And finally, they do experience hunting in the Caribbean islands in South America. So I wanted to touch on that because it's something that is likely affecting Whimbrel, but that we still don't know a whole lot about. In places like Guyana, they use this technique called shocking, in which they use a wire to hunt shorebirds, as well as shooting the birds as well. And many hunters do this for subsistence, where they and their family is consuming the meat, but others will sell it at the market. And there's been some studies on this, and researchers found that the birds sold at the markets reflected the same species composition as what they were seeing in the field during shorebird surveys, and that did include Whimbrel. Okay, I've got a little video here, hopefully it works, but this is a Whimbrel on a nest in the Arctic. So there's a question of why migrate at all if there are these threats. Well, the Arctic has a lot of great resources for the birds. You can see here, the birds blend in really well to the tundra. There's a lot of food for them, and there's a lot of good places to nest. But those resources are only there for a short time. These birds are in the Arctic between June and July only, and then it gets cold and snowy, so they're forced to leave and then come back the following summer when things green up again. And as the Whimbrels travel, they're utilizing a variety of different habitats, usually very open landscapes like the tundra and marsh and agriculture. But something that might be surprising is they will use mangrove forests in Latin America. So the photo on the left here is a Whimbrel hanging out in a really dark mangrove forest. And then, as you can imagine, as their habitat is changing, their diet changes a bit. So their long curved bill is perfectly designed to reach down into burrows of different critters. So some key prey items that they like are fiddler crabs and crawfish and wolf spiders. And they will also eat berries, especially in the sort of northeast portion of North America. So I want to talk about the populations we have in North America here that utilize the Atlantic flyway. So both of these groups winter in Brazil in that region and breed in the Arctic. And the blue arrows indicate northbound or spring migration, and then the pink is southbound or fall migration. The map on the left is the Mackenzie population. So these birds are breeding in the Mackenzie Delta, sort of the north slope of Canada and Alaska. And you can see this population is relying on the Gulf Coast and the Great Plains, as well as Hudson Bay and the East Coast for their migration. And then there's the Hudson Bay population, and they breed in Hudson Bay, as the name indicates, and they rely on the Great Lakes quite a bit, as well as the Southeast United States and the Caribbean islands. So the population I'm interested in here in Texas is the Mackenzie population. So if we just focus on that population here, looking at the map, you can see that that population is relying on not only one flyway, but also the central flyway. So they really rely on both flyways being healthy and them being able to find their habitat and resources that they need. And they're crossing entire states and country boundaries, so it really requires, to conserve these birds, kind of a flyway scale approach. Now, we call their migratory strategy here loop migration because they're using a different route in the spring than the fall. It's sort of elliptical in nature, the shape of it. And one reason we think that birds are using this strategy is because they're taking advantage of wind patterns. So this is just a theory, but shorebirds can't soar, so they're continuously flapping, and that takes a huge amount of energy. So using a tailwind can really help them get somewhere quickly. And you can see on the wind map, I'm not a meteorologist, but the wind map kind of helps explain that a little bit. So whenever we see a track bird doing something strange, something unexpected, we can usually tie that to what the winds were doing that same day. And then they're able to do that huge trip crossing entire oceans by fattening up at key stops along the way. And we call those stopover sites or staging sites. So much like us, when we go on a road trip, we need to stop along the way to fill up our gas tank and, use the bathroom, grab a snack. These birds also need to stop and refuel their energy reserves. So those stopover sites are indicated by the circled areas, and you can see that the Texas coast is one of them. Now, the biggest congregation of Whimbrel on the Texas coast happens in this area near High Island. If you've ever heard of that area, it's pretty famous for birding. And we've been able to determine that most Whimbrels stay in this area for a whole month before leaving to the Arctic. So the research that I'll be talking about today, it takes place in this small area. And the questions we wanted to know were things like, how are Whimbrel using this area and what are the resources that they're needing during stopover? And we also wanted to get an idea of how many Whimbrel were using that area, so getting sort of a population estimate. In order to answer those questions, we use GPS tracking. We've been tracking Whimbrels with GPS tags for the last 2 years, and we'll continue to do this upcoming spring. We've got more tags to put out. And we use a technology tag that has the ability to record location data as frequently as every 1 second if we wanted it to, but that's much too frequent for data management purposes. So we get it every 30 minutes. But those tags give us information on altitude and temperature and speed as well, so we can tell if the bird is moving or in flight or stationary at that time. We trap the birds using snare lines, and the snare lines don't harm the bird in any way, but once we capture them, we attach the GPS tags using a backpack harness technique. So ribbon is looped around the legs and then secured to the tag. And this is a very precise process that we use. Everything has to be just perfect. Every feather needs to be in place before we let that bird go. And we've never had a bird do anything weird after release. They always fly away, shake off, and go on their merry way as a happy bird. So in Texas, like I said, we're primarily using this data to learn about their habitat needs during stopover. And because we can get this very frequent, accurate location data, we can follow the birds around in real time. And by following them around, we can collect data on things like what they're eating and how many other Whimbrel and other shorebirds are using that same field, and things like water level and vegetation data. And those are things we can't get by just looking at the dots on a screen. So during the day, the birds are spread out in rice fields feeding, but at night, they typically congregate together at a single roost. So that's a really good opportunity to get an idea of how many Whimbrel are at this stopover site at the moment. So you can see this one bird tracks that it's moving to the southern location almost every night to roost. And so that's pretty typical of what the birds are doing. So we spent every evening counting the birds as they flew into the roost, and then every morning as they flew out of the roost. And at the peak of migration, we counted 9,200 birds in a single evening.
Wow.
I wanted to understand what was so attractive about that roost site specifically. So I went to the exact locations where the tagged birds were roosting the morning after they were used. And I collected habitat data on them. And I've only got 1 year of that data, but the locations so far had 0 brush, no trees in sight. And this is a wide open landscape. So we're talking about no woody cover for literally miles around. And the water depth was pretty important as well. The water depth was no deeper than 4 inches, so between 1 and 4 inches deep. So this is a look at the summary of what we found from this work over the last 2 springs. We believe that there are between 13 and 15,000 Whimbrel in that area between East Texas and Louisiana. And over the course of 4 days, we observed almost 4,300 Whimbrel at 21 different locations. And about 90% of the birds were in rice fields. And in just one field, we observed 2,000 Whimbrel and 22 shorebird species. And these fields are not very big. And crawfish was the main thing that they were eating. And another important thing to note is that about 3/4 of the location at night were on a national wildlife refuge, and then during the day they were mostly on rice fields. So just want to talk about like why the birds are using rice fields, because that's a pretty interesting thing. These rice fields have been there for a very long time. Generation after generation of rice farmers have been working in this area. So what it comes down to is habitat and timing. Shorebirds typically prefer an area with no shrubs or trees, like I mentioned, because predators can hide there. They need a soft ground to probe into to feed, so they need moist soil or sheet water. And then there needs to be food in that soil, in this case, invertebrates. And it seems like after harvest of the rice, the decaying rice matter that's left behind kind of feeds that invertebrate population. At least that's the notion that I have from talking to farmers and other folks. So all of those habitat needs are met when a field is in that early stage of rice farming, when it's being flushed to germinate the seeds. And in most years, the timing of rice production lines up really closely with shorebird migration, as you can see here. So this is a look at nighttime locations with habitat type from 2022 and 2023. The 2 yellow colors are fields related to rice production, and then the blue are shallow wetlands. And as you can see, the birds are much more spread out in 2023. And that's because it was a much wetter spring, and the large roost that I mentioned was kind of inundated with water that was too deep. So they had to spread out, whereas in 2022, it was very dry and they kind of piled into just a select few wetlands. And then I just wanted to zoom in and show you that open water area that made up the majority of locations in 2022. You can see they're really piling into those shallow water areas. And then the light blue color is healthy marsh that kind of surrounds it. And this is a comparison of daytime locations for both years. You can see that in 2022, rice was the most used habitat type. But in 2023, the points are much more spread out spatially, and a wider variety of habitats, including more cattle pastures. And again, that's because of 1 year being dry and 1 year being wet. Now, these are the tracks from Whimbrels after they leave the Texas stopover site. They travel along the mid-continent, for the most part, beelining it to the breeding grounds. A couple of birds wandered a bit. We believe those birds could have been subadults and just not really serious about breeding yet. And then once they arrive in that McKenzie River Delta area, they start breeding activities. Not all birds made it to the breeding grounds, however. We have 5 known mortalities out of the 38 total birds that we've tagged. And when this happens, we've been able to retrieve the tags and try to find clues at the kill site of how the bird might have been killed. And we believe peregrines are responsible for most of them, just based on how we found the tags. But the good news is once we retrieve the tags, we can reuse them. So if you imagine we're following the Whimbrel up to their breeding ground, we're now in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska, and it's kind of neat to see how concentrated and focused the birds' movements are during this time. They don't really venture too far outside of their territory. And again, this is about June to July. And then after the breeding season, I imagine it's an exhausting breeding season for them. They need to replenish their fat reserves so that they can head south. So they head to Hudson Bay to do that, to replenish their fat reserves. And then they'll move east to the coast where they're feeding on fiddler crabs and berries. And then once October and November rolls around, they're going to start thinking about jumping off that east coast and flying directly to South America. Some birds will venture south along the coast, but that is, I'd say, the minority of the birds. So we've put out 38 tags so far, and we currently have the full year life cycle for 6 birds. Now, I wanted to explain why that is. Our tags are programmed to transmit the data to cell towers, and the cell towers in North America are different than South America. So when the birds go to South America, they go offline from us. They're still collecting data on the tag, but they don't get uploaded to our database. Once they come back north, we'll get a big data dump and we can see where they spent the winter. But until then, we're just in the dark about if the bird is alive or dead. So the fact that the majority of the birds haven't returned does not necessarily mean that they've died in South America or on their wintering grounds. It could be, but we don't know. It could be that these birds are hanging out in a dark mangrove forest and the solar panel on the tag just couldn't recharge and the tag died. So unfortunately, we just don't know. But the good thing is we can see the movements of these 6 birds, which is incredible information. Okay, so how can we help shorebirds at this site, the stopover site? We're doing a couple things in order to ensure that their habitat needs are met for shorebirds. And so in Texas, rice farmers have to pay to get water from a water authority. That's just kind of how the system works here. And in order to provide habitat in the fall after the rice harvest, we need to provide water to landowners at no cost, because otherwise they don't have a huge incentive to flood their fields. So I got involved in a project with some local conservation groups that are supplying landowners in this area with water at no cost. And they have to do it at a time and a depth that will benefit shorebirds. So it's kind of a win-win for landowners and shorebirds in that sense. So far, water was delivered last August through October, and it was a drought during that time, so the birds were absolutely loving it. And I got to go out there and count the birds during this time before and after the flooding to kind of see what the impact was. So I'll show you some of those results in the next slide. But I also wanted to mention my group has a mechanism for recognizing certain sites of importance to shorebirds. You may have heard of it. It's called WISRN, the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. So I would like to nominate this site as a WISRN site to join the network. So these are the results from those bird surveys I conducted at the fall flooded fields. And you can see that most bird groups were much more abundant when water was applied. You know, it might seem obvious or something that's expected, but it's really good to collect that data to show the funders, the people that are paying for this water, that what the impact is, that it is truly having an impact on the birds. And then this is a look at shorebird density over the course of the study period. So it's just kind of interesting. It's only one season of data, so you can't really, you know, deduce too much from it. But you can see there were 2 peaks of shorebirds around September 9th and another around the end of September. And, you know, I think this makes sense because males, females, and juvenile shorebirds, they all come through at different times. And so this very well could be, you know, the males coming through and then later the juveniles coming through. And this is just some photos from this water allocation project. It's pretty cool to see the very dry, dead looking fields before and then after the water gets on. I don't have awesome photography skills, so I couldn't get great photos of all the birds using them, but you can just see the habitat changes so much from one day to the next. And the bottom row of photos is a rice field, so I just wanted to kind of help you visualize what a rice field looks like. On the left, that's before harvest, and then after haying, and then after the flooding. Aside from putting tags on birds that are using the Texas coast for spring stopover, we're also putting tags on breeding birds in the Arctic, and that will help us learn more about their breeding ecology. I'll be headed to the Arctic this summer for the first time to help out with that study, so I'm super excited to see the shorebirds on their breeding grounds and singing and just in their natural habitat. And we also tag juveniles in Cape Cod to look at subadult movements and survival. So that's a really cool study that's being kicked off in Cape Cod. But again, because of the flexibility of the programming in these tags, a tag that we put out in Texas is giving us information on a bird in the Arctic and Cape Cod and the wintering grounds and, you know, across the whole life cycle. So it's pretty neat seeing the different paths these birds take. One of our birds that was tagged in Texas ended up going down the Pacific Flyway. That was a really interesting one. Unfortunately, that bird died, so we weren't able to see where that bird wintered, but we've seen some pretty interesting things from these tags, and hopefully we'll continue to get more out and learn new things. Okay, so that's all I have. I wanted to also mention that we have the International Shorebird Survey. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of it, but this is a citizen science project in which birders can go out and help collect data on shorebirds because we really need more data. A lot of birders go out and put X number of peeps, and that's not helpful for figuring out population declines and things like that. So if anyone is interested in helping out with the ISS, please contact me and I will definitely get you started on that.
Okay, does anyone have questions for Sam? That was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
I have a question. I'm kind of fascinated by how seemingly fortuitous the huge amount of rice farming in Texas turns out to be for Whimbrels. Does that help the numbers? And also just wondering, where were they feeding before? If these fields had to be flooded in the after harvest, where was the habitat for the Whimbrels historically?
Yeah, that's something that me and the other researchers talk about all the time. It's something that we really don't know. We assume that was all coastal marsh and coastal wetlands, and it's been turned into agriculture, so it's kind of acting as a surrogate wetland in a way. So I guess hopefully that answers your question, but it's a mystery, and it's something I think about a lot. What did this landscape used to look like?
Is there that much more food within the marsh than there is on the beaches along the coast?
So the Whimbrel will use the beaches to roost, just to spend the night, but not to forage. So I do think there's quite a bit more food, at least the food that Whimbrel like, in further inland.
Sam, I noticed on your date time 2022 and 2023, you said that the rice fields were a particular color and the marshes. And then on the far right of the images, there was a lot of red. What is the red?
Yeah, red is developed land. So it could be oil pads, it could be a city. Probably just concrete, I guess, is a good general way to put that.
So what was the rough distance between the good habitat and the development that they would tolerate?
That's a good question. It's something I haven't really measured or looked into too closely, but we did actually see Whimbrel using areas right next to oil pads, like probably 10 feet away if there was pooling water there. So they didn't really seem to mind that, but even in those areas, there's not many humans walking around and driving around. It's pretty quiet area in terms of humans. So yeah, something I would like to look at, but I think if the housing development, if that keeps kind of encroaching in from Houston area, I think that will for sure be a problem. And that's something we want to avoid, is this agricultural area turning into a more urban area, because that certainly would not be habitat for them.
Is there any type of program in that part of Texas, like we have in New Jersey, regarding like purchasing easements?
Yes, we do have the ability to get conservation easements on land, and that's something that a lot of groups are working on pushing through.
Okay,
But
I haven't looked at the weather. What's it supposed?
in Texas, there is, a different culture. I would say 98% of Texas is privately owned, and people are very, very protective of their land. And so the idea of them not having full control of what they do with their land is a hard sell. And so it's a tough sell. But we do have that ability, yeah.
Is there any additional benefit to the rice farmers having the Whimbrels there when they're not growing rice?
Well, that's a good question. I'd say no, unless they are a birder and just appreciate birds, but there is a financial incentive for them to attract ducks to their land. And so things like teal could utilize the same water depth potentially as shorebirds. So giving them what we call duck water, where they can hunt, is benefiting shorebirds. And so it's, even though they're hunting there, it's water, whereas it would just be a dry field otherwise. So in some ways, hunters are providing habitat for wildlife.
Out of curiosity, comparing the rice growing in Texas to that in Florida, where there's very little, do they also grow sugar in Texas?
Yes, sugarcane is grown in the very southern part of Texas, so near Brownsville and the Rio Grande Valley. Sugarcane fields are pretty prevalent.
So there's no conflict then with the rice farmers versus the sugar farmers?
No, but I have been told that in Louisiana, a lot of rice farmers are converting to sugarcane. So, that's not a threat here necessarily, but it certainly could be in the future.
I was curious because the sugarcane doesn't sit and rot, they burn it. So I didn't know if there was any benefit to the birds.
I don't know, but that is a really good research question, because burning native grasslands is definitely a positive thing. So I kind of wonder what the burn does to the ground and the invertebrates there, and I'm just not sure.
Mostly nothing. The big debate is, for example, getting water into the Everglades. If they were to get rid of the sugar farming and put in rice, the water would be clean when it got to the Everglades. They wouldn't have to go through treatment areas. Whereas when you have sugar, it wastes the water and it doesn't seem to benefit the land at all.
Oh, I
So it's
see.
curious.
Okay, so the ash and things is bad for the water quality.
And the smoke's no good.
Yeah. Huh.
I wonder if the conversion in Louisiana to sugarcane will push more Whimbrel and shorebirds into the East Texas area.
It's a good question. We kind of think that this East Texas area and Louisiana is kind of the super stopover site. We had a lot of our birds venture into Louisiana and then come back. And so they're kind of using this whole region as a single stopover site.
Looking at your, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Sandy. Continue, Sandy.
I was just looking at your maps of the birds going over the Gulf of Mexico to South America. It seems that they're not island hopping at all in the Lesser Antilles. The map seems to indicate they fly right by them.
Some of our birds do stop there. Yeah.
Okay.
The the map in the beginning was based on a lower resolution tag, and so they were kind of just general flight lines, but not as accurate as our tags that we have now.
But you have a time component too, so if they stop in one place for a while, you'll see that.
Yes. Yes, we will see that.
So are the rice fields in the High Island area?
Yes, well, so very close. If you're traveling to High Island from, say, Houston area from the north.
I've been often, actually, that's why I'm questioning.
Sorry?
I've been there a number
Oh,
of
you
times.
have. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're familiar with the area. So yeah, if you're traveling north to south to get to High Island, all of the agricultural fields are on either side of that road that runs north to south. And that's exactly where we work, yeah.
Interesting, because I've seen that and didn't notice the birds, so it's interesting.
Yes, many people don't. It's pretty funny because there's so many birders that come to that area every year. And I don't think many of them know about the shorebirds in these fields. I mean, you can get Hudsonian godwits there. It's really buff-breasted sandpiper. It's really good birding if you take the
Well,
time
I've
to
seen
get
the
road.
shorebird Bolivar Flats, and then on the way down, to Bolivar Flats, there's another stopover place that I can't remember the name of that had a lot of shorebirds, but I didn't realize they were in the fields.
Yes, Bolivar is a great place, and that's actually a Wizard site, a designated shorebird reserve, and it's pretty incredible. That's where the birds can go and safely rest and not have trucks driving through the beach. And Houston Audubon manages that land, and they do a really good job there. But yeah, if you're ever going to High Island, I definitely recommend you check out those ag fields north of there.
Really interesting.
Are people choosing to eat the Whimbrel as specifically Whimbrel as a species of shorebird, or is it they're just picking any shorebird?
I don't know, and I don't think many people know that answer. We have a Whimbrel initiative that we're kicking off this year, and so a bunch of different partners are getting together to address the different issues that Whimbrel are facing, and so hunting in the Caribbean is going to be one of those issues that we're going to try to address and get to the heart of the hunting culture there, and what can we do to kind of prevent that from happening, because these birds are so long lived, they really can't handle that sort of hunting pressure. And so, yeah, I'm not sure exactly why. I mean, I would assume as a hunter, if you see a big chunky bird like a Whimbrel out there, that's going to be a target, but I can't say.
I did a quick dive in today to see if there are any recipes out there, and there's nothing. I mean, specifically for Whimbrel, but I think it could be just, they're just, as you said, they're just large shorebirds.
Yeah.
You've never tasted one, have you?
Oh no.
Oh, goodness. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there any benefit to the rice farmers to have their fields flooded in the fall?
Yes. So like I said, the teal hunting season is that's kind of the incentive that they would want to flood their fields for. And then in the spring, obviously, if we could provide water in the spring, that would be really helpful for the actual rice growing.
Mhm.
Then they get free water.
Yes, free water.
So the teal hunting, they get reimbursed for?
Yeah, so I should explain that. So it's not just the landowner hunting. They can if they want, but generally they will have people pay to go on their land to hunt. So
I
and
see.
make a pretty penny from doing that.
Where is the water coming from that they're getting?
The water comes from rivers, and the navigation districts are in charge of kind of distributing that water and holding it and releasing it. And so farmers have to put in orders to this authority and pay them money, and then they come out and open up the canal to let water into their property. It's a really interesting system. I don't know of many other places that do it this way, but it's a way to make sure everyone gets water in a fair way, I guess. But it's very interesting.
Any other questions for Sam?
None here.
Okay. Well, that was very, very informative. And Now, I think we all have to keep in mind when we head to South Texas to do some birding that we have to check out those fields.
Yeah, let me know if you're here. Also, we have Manomet, the headquarters in Massachusetts, is open to the public, and there's a nature trail. And, so if any of you happen to go up that way, I don't think it's too far from Montclair, but, head up that way and check out that property. It's pretty.
What is the town that it's in?
Plymouth.
What, 3.5, 4 hour drive?
Where are they located? Right on Cape Cod then? Plymouth?
Plymouth is where headquarters is, yeah. But a lot of the actual biology work is done on Cape Cod and that refuge there.
I'm not sure which refuge. It's like the one by Audubon?
Monomoy, and maybe it's not exactly Cape Cod.
Or one Monomoy?
Yeah,
Monomoy, the island then?
yes.
Okay. But
Yeah, I got
that you
to go
have
out
to take a
there.
boat to get to.
Yeah, I got to go out there on the boat, and that was pretty cool. I had never seen a horseshoe crab before, and I saw a bunch of horseshoe crabs, and it was pretty cool.
Oh, it's just off of Chatham, right?
It's
Yeah.
just off of Chatham, and at the moment, since the sandbar off of Monomoy, where the Fish and Wildlife or people were located, the sandbar is pretty much washed, a good deal of it's washed away. So the ocean is now hitting the coast, and Fish and Wildlife have had to move. But that really shouldn't have any major impact on Monomoy Island, on the island itself, which is just south of there.
Sam, you don't by chance know who the refuge manager for that National Wildlife Refuge Complex is now, do you?
I don't. My colleagues at Manomet could definitely tell me, but I don't know offhand.
I was just curious because the wildlife refuge in northern New Jersey, Wallkill, our refuge manager quite a number of years ago relocated and became the manager up there, Libby Herlin. I didn't know if she was still around.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure about that.
No worries. Any other questions? No?
Sounds like
Okay.
you've answered them all.
That's great. Thank you so much for your presentation, for
Yes.
taking time on Valentine's Day to be with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope you enjoyed the Texas talk.
Very much.
Yes.
Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Yeah, it's nice to get another perspective on High Island.
Definitely. Okay, so I think we're good for this evening then. If no one has any other business, then we'll see some of you for the virtual bird walk later next week. And then I hope to see many of you for our upcoming regular meetings. So stay warm, stay dry, and happy Valentine's Day again.
Good night, guys.
Good night all.
Thank
Good
you
night,
again.
Valentine's Day.
Thank you.
Happy
Enjoy your champagne.
I'm excited. Bye, everyone.
Good night.
So I end it for all of us then?
Okay,
I'm gonna-
cheers.